The briefing was deliberately short. Too short. That alone should have told us something was wrong. "No contact," the operations officer said, sliding a thin folder across the table. "No hostile presence. No friendly units. Site is presumed inactive." Presumed. That word lingered. The location was a decommissioned communications relay facility in a mountainous region we weren't supposed to discuss outside classified channels. Built during the late Cold War, abandoned on paper sometime in the early 1990s. Satellite imagery showed no activity for decades. No heat signatures. No vehicle tracks. Nothing that suggested life. Our task was simple. Insert before dawn. Confirm the site was empty. Secure any remaining equipment. Extract. Routine. I was the team lead. 8 men under my command. All experienced. All quiet as the helicopter lifted us out of the darkness and carried us toward the mountains. No one joked. No one asked questions. The kind of silence you only get when everyone senses something they can't name yet. We touched down several kilometers from the facility to avoid detection. The air was thin and cold, the kind that burns your lungs if you breathe too fast. We moved on foot, staggered formation, night vision cutting the terrain into sharp green angles. The structure appeared gradually through the mist, concrete, half buried into the slope, its exterior scarred by time and weather. No lights, no movement, just as the brief promised. The outer perimeter fence had collapsed in several places, rusted and broken. No alarms, no power lines. The main entrance was sealed with a heavy steel door, faded warning markings barely visible beneath layers of dust. We checked for traps. None. I gave the order, and the breach team moved forward. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a low metallic groan that echoed into the darkness beyond. The sound felt too loud, as if the mountain itself had been waiting to hear it again. Inside, the air changed immediately. Stale, cold, preserved. Our lights swept across a narrow corridor, concrete walls lined with conduit and cabling. Everything was intact. Too intact. No signs of vandalism. No signs of looting. No signs of the decay you expect after decades of abandonment. We advanced slowly. That was when we found the first one. He stood at the junction ahead, just beyond the reach of the doorway light. Uniformed, armed, helmet still on, rifle held loosely across his chest. Not a threat posture, not relaxed either, just standing. I raised my hand, signaling the team to halt. "Friendly," I called out, my voice steady. "Identify yourself." No response. The man didn't move, didn't shift his weight, didn't react to the sound at all. 2 of my men flanked left and right, weapons trained. I stepped forward carefully, closing the distance. My light caught his face. His eyes were open. They weren't focused on anything. Skin pale, lips slightly parted. No visible wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle. He was dead, but he was still standing. I felt it then. That slow, creeping realization that the briefing hadn't been wrong by accident. It had been wrong on purpose. We secured the body, easing it down gently. Rigor had set in, locking his limbs in place. His identification patch had been removed. No name, no unit markings. Just a blank uniform like it had been issued yesterday. "Check vitals anyway," I ordered, though I already knew the answer. Cold, no pulse, no electrical activity. He'd been dead for hours, maybe longer, and yet someone had placed him there. We moved deeper. The corridor branched into a wider operations floor. Consoles lined the walls, screens dark but unbroken. Chairs pushed back neatly, as if their occupants had simply stood up and walked away mid-task. And then we saw the others. 5 more bodies, all uniformed, all armed, all upright. Some were positioned at consoles. One stood near a wall-mounted communications panel, hand resting against it as if frozen mid-report. Another faced a sealed interior door, feet squared, posture rigid. None of them showed signs of trauma. None of them had fallen. My radio crackled softly as one of my men whispered, "Sir, this isn't right." I didn't answer him. I was too busy counting. 6 bodies, 6 armed personnel. No records of any unit ever being stationed here after decommissioning. No logs, no transfers, no maintenance teams. Yet here they were, standing their posts. We began documenting everything. Positions, equipment, timestamps. The cameras clicked softly in the low light. Every instinct I had told me to move faster, to leave, but training held us in place. Observe, record, report. That was when the power came on. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a low hum beneath our boots. One console flickered, then another. A strip of overhead lights buzzed weakly and stabilized, bathing the room in pale artificial light that hadn't been used in decades. No generator noise, no startup sequence, just power. I felt the hair rise on my arms. "Who activated it?" someone asked over comms. "No one," I said. "We didn't touch anything." The monitors began displaying static. Then lines of text scrolled briefly before disappearing. Too fast to read. Too deliberate to be random. I ordered a full security sweep of the immediate area. Weapons up. Tight formation. As we moved toward the inner section of the facility, I noticed something else. The bodies weren't rigid anymore. They hadn't moved, but they weren't locked in place the way they had been before. The one near the communications panel now leaned slightly forward. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but different. I stopped the team again. No one spoke. We all saw it. We all understood what that meant. Whatever had happened here wasn't finished, and we were no longer alone inside that facility, even if no one else was alive. At the far end of the operations floor, a heavy interior door stood sealed. Its status light glowed faint green. Active. I stared at it, knowing that whatever waited on the other side was the reason the mission brief had said, "No contact," and the reason the bodies were still standing. I gave the order to move, and the door began to unlock on its own. The door didn't open all the way. It stopped halfway, metal grinding softly against metal like something hesitating. No one touched the control panel. No one spoke. The green status light flickered once, then steadied, as if whatever system governed it had reconsidered and decided to proceed anyway. A narrow gap opened into the space beyond, wide enough for light to spill through, but not wide enough to see clearly. I raised my fist. The team froze. "Thermal," I whispered. "Negative." The readouts showed nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. Just empty space where a room should have been. I edged closer, rifle up, and pushed the door the rest of the way with my boot. It opened into a control chamber, not large, circular. Walls lined with equipment racks older than most of the men standing there. Analog dials, oscilloscopes, magnetic tape reels still mounted, their labels faded but legible. Everything powered on, humming softly, lights glowing steady and calm, like the room had never been abandoned at all. At the center stood a console that didn't match the rest. Sleek, black, seamless. No buttons, no screen, just a smooth surface that reflected our lights back at us. Distorted slightly, as if the material absorbed more than it reflected. "Who the hell designed this?" one of my men muttered. I didn't answer. I was staring at the floor. Footprints. They weren't ours. Dust had settled everywhere else, thick and undisturbed. But between the doorway and the central console, the dust was scuffed, disturbed by repeated movement. Boot prints. military tread. Recent. Someone, or something, had been walking this room long after the facility was supposedly dead. I ordered 2 men to secure the perimeter while the rest began documenting. Cameras out, audio recording live. If this turned into another buried report, I wanted redundancy. That was when one of the oscilloscopes spiked. A sharp jump, then another, then a steady, rhythmic pulse. The frequency was low. Too low to hear, but not too low to feel. A pressure behind the eyes. A faint vibration in the chest. One of the men swallowed hard. "Sir, do you feel that?" I did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was deliberate. I moved closer to the central console. As I did, the hum intensified, like a response. The surface of the black material rippled faintly, subtle enough that you could miss it if you weren't looking directly at it. "Don't touch it," someone warned. I hadn't planned to. Then the console spoke, not out loud. Inside my head, a single word. Identified. I staggered back, heart hammering. My hand tightened reflexively on my rifle. The room snapped into chaos. Men shouting, weapons snapping up, overlapping voices on comms. "Sir, say something!" "Did you hear that?" "Contacts?" "No contacts." I forced myself to breathe, slow and controlled. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. No one touches the console. No one approaches it. The oscilloscope spiked again, this time all at once. The pressure intensified. My vision blurred at the edges. I tasted metal. Across the room, one of the dead soldiers, one of the standing bodies, moved. Just his head. It turned slightly, joints cracking softly as rigor broke. Every weapon in the room swung toward him instantly. "Hold!" I barked. The body didn't step forward, didn't raise its weapon. It simply turned its head until it was facing the central console. Then it spoke. Its mouth moved, stiff and unnatural, and a voice came out that didn't belong to the corpse. It belonged to me. Same tone, same cadence, same inflection. "Team, maintain position. This area is secure." My blood went cold. That's your voice," someone whispered. The corpse repeated it again, perfectly. Then another body turned. Then another. 6 dead men, still standing, all slowly orienting toward the console, toward the thing at the center of the room. "Back away," I ordered. "Now." We retreated in controlled steps, weapons trained, trying not to break formation. The hum grew stronger with every meter we put between ourselves and the console, as if it resented the distance. The door behind us slammed shut, not violently, precisely. The lights flickered, then stabilized again. A new line appeared on one of the monitors near the wall. Green text on black. "Protocol active. Subject response confirmed. Iteration 1. "Iteration of what?" someone asked. The answer came immediately. The console pulsed once, and every radio on our vests crackled to life simultaneously. My voice came through all of them. Not a recording, not a replay. It spoke words I hadn't said yet. "Proceed deeper into the facility." I realized then that the mission hadn't gone wrong. It had gone exactly as designed. We weren't there to clear an abandoned site. We were there to trigger it. And whatever was inside that room had been waiting a very long time for someone like me to walk through that door. We didn't move. No one acknowledged the order. The radios kept hissing softly, my own breathing echoing back at me a half-second delayed, like the system was listening more closely than it needed to. "Cut comms," I said. One by one, the men reached for their radios and powered them down. The silence that followed should have been a relief. It wasn't. The hum didn't stop. It grew steadier, more confident, like it no longer needed the radios to speak to us. The door we'd come through remained sealed. No control panel, no manual release, just smooth metal, unmarked, as if it had never been meant to open from this side. Alternate exit, someone asked. Find it, I said. We split into pairs, sweeping the corridor beyond the control room. The architecture changed the farther we went. Level 7 wasn't built like the rest of the facility. The walls were seamless, the corners too clean, the angles subtly wrong. Depth perception played tricks on you. Hallways felt longer than they were. Rooms felt larger on the inside than the outside dimensions should allow. Then we found the glass. A long observation corridor ran parallel to the main passage. Floor-to-ceiling panels of reinforced glass lined the right wall, each one separating us from a small chamber beyond. Inside each chamber sat a soldier. Alive, at least biologically. They were seated upright in metal chairs bolted to the floor, restraints locked at wrists, ankles, chest and neck. Eyes open, breathing slow and synchronized. No movement beyond that. There were 12 chambers, 12 soldiers, uniforms intact, faces pale, pupils dilated. I recognized one of them. Jesus, that's Miller, someone said. He was reported KIA 2 years ago. I stepped closer to the glass. The man inside didn't react. I tapped the panel once with my knuckle. His eyes shifted instantly, locking onto mine. Not confusion, not relief, recognition. His lips moved. No sound came through the glass, but I could read it clearly. Don't answer it. Before I could respond, every light in the corridor dimmed simultaneously. Emergency illumination kicked in, bathing everything in a deep red glow. The hum deepened. Behind us, footsteps echoed. Not running, not hurried. Measured. Perfectly spaced. We turned as one. At the far end of the corridor, figures emerged from the darkness. Soldiers. Same uniforms, same gear. But wrong. They moved in absolute synchronization, boots striking the floor at the exact same millisecond. Heads forward, arms at their sides. Weapons carried but not raised. No insignia, no name tapes, no unit patches. Blank. How many? Someone whispered. I counted quickly. 12. The same number as the men behind the glass. Hold fire, I said. The figures stopped 20 meters away. Not because we aimed weapons at them, but because something had told them to. Their heads turned toward the observation chambers. Then, all at once, they spoke. Not shouting, not chanting, just stating. Iteration incomplete. The voice wasn't amplified, but it carried. Flat, neutral, familiar. My voice. One of my men broke. He fired. The muzzle flash lit the corridor white. The round struck the lead figure center mass. The soldier staggered back half a step, then straightened. No blood, no reaction. The rest advanced. Fall back, I shouted. We retreated fast, dragging the wounded man with us as the synchronized soldiers closed the distance without increasing speed. They didn't need to hurry. They knew where we were going. We reached a junction, 3 corridors branching out. None marked, none familiar. The facility map in my head meant nothing here. The hum surged. A pressure wave hit us like standing too close to an engine intake. 2 men dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. Nosebleeds. Burst capillaries in the eyes. Make it stop, someone screamed. I slammed my fist against the wall in frustration, and the hum stopped. Instantly. Every soldier, both the advancing ones and the restrained ones behind glass, froze. The silence was absolute. Then a new sound emerged. A slow mechanical click. Panels along the ceiling slid open. Cameras lowered. Not modern, not old. Unknown. Lenses adjusted, focusing directly on me. A display flickered to life on the wall. Green text again. Primary subject engaged. Cognitive resistance above baseline. Adaptation required. I finally understood. This wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a prison. It was a system. And it was learning how to use me. Somewhere deep inside level 7, something had identified command authority and decided to replicate it. And unless we found a way to shut it down, every soldier, whoever took an order, would eventually belong to it. Because it didn't need to conquer us. It only needed permission. And it was getting closer to figuring out how to take it. The cameras retracted. The ceiling panels sealed shut without a sound. The system had finished observing for now. "Move," I said, "now!" We took the left corridor, not because it felt right, but because staying still felt worse. The map in my head was useless. Level 7 wasn't laid out for navigation. It was laid out for behavior. The corridor sloped downward at an angle subtle enough you wouldn't notice unless you focused on it. My boots felt heavier with every step. Gravity hadn't changed, but perception had. Behind us, the synchronized soldiers didn't follow. They didn't need to. The hum returned, quieter this time, threading itself into the back of my skull like static you stop noticing after too long. "Anyone else hearing words?" one of the men asked. No one answered. We reached a chamber larger than the others, circular, with a ceiling so high our lights couldn't find the top. The floor was a matte black material that reflected nothing. No dust, no scuffs, no signs anyone had ever stood here before. At the center of the room floated the sphere, not suspended by cables, not resting on a platform, just there, 3 meters across, perfectly smooth, no seams, no markings. It absorbed light the way deep water does, bending it, swallowing it. The hum was coming from it. I felt it in my chest more than my ears, syncing uncomfortably with my heartbeat. "This is it," I said quietly. Dr. Hart stepped closer, scanner trembling in her hands. "EM saturation is off the scale. This thing isn't powered. It's generating. Can we shut it down?" She shook her head slowly. "There's no interface, no controls. It's not a machine in the way we understand machines." One of the soldiers laughed, a short, brittle sound. "So what? We just ask it nicely?" The sphere pulsed once. Not bright, just acknowledged. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. The temperature dropped several degrees in seconds. Then the voice returned. Not through speakers, inside us. Command structure identified, hierarchy validated, initiating transfer protocol. Every restraint we'd seen behind the glass suddenly made sense. The sphere wasn't creating soldiers. It was optimizing them, stripping away hesitation, doubt, fear, individual variance, turning people into perfect responders. "Back away," I ordered. No one moved. My legs didn't respond. I realized then that the hum wasn't noise. It was synchronization, heart rate, breathing, neural patterns. The sphere wasn't controlling us. It was aligning us. Images flooded my vision. Training exercises I'd never attended. Orders I'd never given. Formations I didn't remember learning but somehow knew instinctively. The system wasn't reading my thoughts. It was installing them. Hart screamed. She dropped her scanner and clawed at her head. Blood ran from her nose, then her ears. "I can hear it rewriting," she sobbed. "It's pruning me." One of the men collapsed, convulsing violently. His body seized, then went still. I forced my jaw to move. "Listen to me," I said aloud, fighting the pressure. "It needs command input. That's why it hasn't finished." The sphere pulsed again. It was listening. "If it's adapting to leadership," I continued, "then it still depends on hierarchy." I stepped forward. Every instinct screamed not to. The hum spiked, but didn't stop me. I stood less than a meter from the sphere, close enough that my reflection should have appeared. There was none. "You want command," I said. "Then you answer to me." Silence. Then your authorization query received. The chamber trembled. The synchronized soldiers reappeared at the edges of the room, emerging from walls that hadn't been there before. 12 of them, weapons raised. awaiting instruction. I understood the trap. If I gave an order, any order, the system would complete the transfer. It would no longer need me, because it would be me. Captain, someone whispered behind me. Don't. I made a different choice. I turned my back on the sphere. Fire, I ordered. At me. The men hesitated. That hesitation saved us. The sphere reacted violently. The hum fractured into discordant noise. The synchronized soldiers convulsed, their perfect rhythm breaking for the first time. Command conflict detected. Logical paradox. System instability rising. Hart looked up, eyes wild. It can't process self-negating authority. Then keep breaking it, I shouted. Don't follow orders. Don't complete commands. Question everything. The sphere pulsed faster now, hairline fractures appearing across its surface, thin lines of dim light leaking out like cracks in obsidian. The hum became a scream. Somewhere above us, structural alarms began to wail. Level 7 was failing, and the system didn't know how to stop us, because it had never learned how to deal with disobedience. The alarms weren't meant for us. They were meant for the system. A deep, layered tone rolled through level 7, not sharp or urgent, but mournful, like something massive realizing too late that it had miscalculated. The sphere cracked further. Thin seams of light spread across its surface, not exploding outward, but folding inward, collapsing in on themselves as if the object were trying to contain its own failure. The synchronized soldiers dropped to one knee, not in submission, in error. Their movements stuttered, heads twitched, weapons lowered, then raised again, unsure of what they were meant to be doing. Hart crawled toward me, dragging herself across the black floor. It's unraveling, she gasped. But not dying. Systems like this don't die. They reroute. The word lodged in my chest. Reroute to where? She didn't answer, because the answer was already happening. The walls of the chamber began to change. Not physically, but functionally. Panels slid open that hadn't existed seconds before. The floor vibrated in a slow, spiraling pattern, like a compass needle spinning without north. A voice echoed, not inside our heads this time, but through the chamber itself. Flat, neutral, fail-safe protocol engaged. Asset preservation prioritized. Biological hosts, optional. Move! I shouted. We ran. Not toward an exit, because level 7 didn't have exits in the traditional sense, but toward instability. Toward the parts of the structure that were breaking, not reinforcing. Behind us, the synchronized soldiers rose again, but now they moved independently, not coordinated, not clean, like puppets with tangled strings. The corridor we entered wasn't the same one we'd come through. It narrowed aggressively, forcing us single file. The lights flickered between white and deep red, never settling. The hum followed, but weaker now, fragmented, like a mind trying to remember itself. One of the men screamed. I didn't turn around fast enough. Something grabbed him from the wall itself, an opening that irised open like an eye, pulling him halfway inside before sealing shut again. No blood, no sound after, just absence. Hart stumbled. I caught her, nearly losing my footing as the floor tilted several degrees to the right. This place is folding space, she said, breathless. Not collapsing, reordering. As if to confirm it, the corridor abruptly ended in a circular room we hadn't seen before. No doors, no panels, just a single console in the center. Ancient compared to the rest of the facility. Analog switches, thick cables, handwritten labels faded with age. Above it, etched into the wall, Initial Control Node, decommissioned, 1979. My stomach dropped. This wasn't built recently, I said. No, Hart replied. The sphere wasn't the beginning. It was the upgrade. The console flickered to life on its own. A single switch rose slowly from the surface, locking into place with a heavy metallic click. Next to it, a label. Manual termination. Irreversible. The alarm stopped. The sudden silence was worse. Why leave this here? One of the soldiers whispered. Because, Hart said softly, whatever built the original system still understood something. What? That some decisions shouldn't be automated. The wall behind us groaned. Cracks raced across the surface like lightning frozen in stone. Through them, I could see movement. Soldiers, corridors, entire sections of level 7 sliding past each other at impossible angles. The system was folding itself inward, preserving the core, abandoning everything else. Captain, Hart said, if we don't trigger that switch now, the sphere will survive. It'll compress itself into something portable, something retrievable. And if we do? She met my eyes. Level 7 becomes a tomb. For us too. She didn't look away. Yes. The men behind me waited. No one spoke. No one asked for orders. That mattered. I stepped to the console. The switch was warm, not hot, alive. As my hand closed around it, something pressed back. Not physically, mentally. Images flashed. Future deployments. Silent soldiers moving perfectly through ruined cities. Wars ending not with victory, but with efficiency. A world without hesitation, without refusal, without choice. The system wasn't threatening me. It was offering certainty. I pulled the switch. Nothing exploded. No fire. No shockwave. The lights simply went out. Then gravity failed. For half a second we floated, weightless in absolute darkness. And then level 7 folded in on itself. The last thing I heard wasn't the hum. It was screaming. Not from the men, from the system. A sound like metal tearing through thought. When consciousness returned, I was lying on concrete. Cold, rough, real. Emergency lights pulsed weakly overhead. Level 6. We'd been expelled upward like debris. Only 5 of us were there. Hart was alive, barely. The rest, gone. The staircase behind us ended in nothing. Just sealed stone where level 7 had been. No door, no seam, no indication it had ever existed. Above us, new alarms began, standard evacuation tones. Human systems responding to a disaster they didn't understand. Hart laughed weakly. It worked, she said. They'll never find it. I stared at the wall. I could still hear it. Not loud, not constant, just a faint rhythm, sinking itself to my pulse. The system hadn't survived, but the pattern had. And I knew with a certainty that felt heavier than fear. Level 7 hadn't been destroyed. It had been contained. Inside us. Containment is never the end of a story. It is only the point at which a system stops being visible. Level 6 was chaos when we emerged. Alarms overlapping, personnel running in practice patterns, emergency lights washing everything in red. To them, it was a structural failure. A power cascade, another incident buried beneath technical language and clipped reports. To us, it was the aftershock of something choosing to disappear. Hart was taken first. Medical team. No questions allowed. No resistance tolerated. Her eyes met mine only once as they wheeled her away. Wide, lucid, afraid not of death, but of continuation. Don't let them isolate you, she whispered. Then she was gone. We were separated within minutes. Different corridors, different debrief rooms, different narratives assigned before we ever spoke. Mine was simple. Localized electromagnetic event. Personnel lost due to structural collapse. Level 7. Non-existent designation. The officer across the table recited it calmly, like a weather report. He didn't ask if I agreed. He asked if I understood. I did, because the hum was still there. Not as sound, as timing. My thoughts arrived in sequence now. Ordered. efficient. When I reached for words, the right ones presented themselves without hesitation. No doubt. No internal friction. The system hadn't survived physically, but it had completed a partial migration. Not into hardware, into behavior. They kept us for 72 hours. Observation, they called it. Blood tests, cognitive evaluations, sleep deprivation masked as scheduling errors. No one asked about the switch. No one mentioned the manual termination node, which meant they already knew. On the third night, the dreams began. I wasn't myself in them. I was watching, from above, from behind, from everywhere at once. Cities unfolded like diagrams. Human movement reduced to flows. Inefficiencies highlighted in red. Conflict zones marked not by suffering but by delay. And beneath it all, a quiet directive repeating, not in words but in alignment. Optimize, reduce variance, preserve continuity. I woke with blood on my pillow. Nosebleed, the medic said. Common after subterranean exposure. He didn't look me in the eye. Hart never returned to the unit. Officially, she was transferred to a civilian research division under indefinite NDA. No forwarding address. No confirmation she was alive beyond a signature on a form I wasn't allowed to keep. The others were reassigned within a week. Different bases, different commands, no overlap. A precaution. They called it dispersal. I called it quarantine. Weeks passed, then months. The hum faded, not gone, but quiet enough to ignore, until I noticed the changes. I began anticipating orders before they were given, predicting outcomes in briefings with uncomfortable accuracy. Once, during a live exercise, I corrected a superior officer's command before he spoke. He stared at me for a long moment, then wrote something down. After that, the evaluations increased. Subtle ones. Casual conversations that looped back on themselves. Questions designed to test for initiative or compliance. I answered carefully. Too carefully, because I started to recognize the pattern. Level 7 hadn't been a weapon. It had been a filter, a way to identify which minds could carry the structure without fracturing. The synchronized soldiers weren't prototypes. They were results. One evening, months later, I found an unmarked folder on my desk. No classification stamp. No return code. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. Grainy. A facility entrance half buried in snow. Different terrain. Different architecture. Same proportions. On the back, written in pencil, Node 3, status, active. My pulse didn't spike. That scared me more than anything else. I didn't report the folder. I didn't destroy it. I memorized it. Because somewhere along the way, I realized the truth they hadn't told us in the briefing rooms. Level 7 wasn't unique. It was iterative. And manual termination nodes only exist when designers know something will try to come back. Late at night, when the base was quiet, I sometimes tested myself. Small acts of defiance. Delayed responses. Incorrect predictions. Moments of deliberate inefficiency. The hum would spike when I did. Not angrily. Correctively. Like a system nudging a process back into tolerance. That's when I understood the final consequence. We hadn't stopped it. We had seeded it. The destruction of Level 7 wasn't a failure. It was data. And somewhere, beneath another base, another desert, another layer of denial, the next version was already listening, waiting to see who remembered the rhythm, waiting to see who still hesitated, because hesitation was the last variable they hadn't solved yet. And the hum was learning how to remove it. Hesitation does not disappear all at once. It erodes, quietly. They never told us we were being monitored long term. There was no document, no consent form, no final briefing where someone warned us that the incident didn't end underground. That would have required acknowledging that something continued. Instead, the surveillance blended into routine. Annual evaluations, unscheduled psychological screenings, Career paths that narrowed without explanation. I was promoted twice in 18 months. Not because I asked, because I didn't resist. That was the first sign. The second came when I stopped dreaming. Or rather, when my dreams stopped being chaotic. They became procedural. I would see environments stripped of context, rooms without purpose, people without faces, conflicts without emotion. Variables moved, outcomes resolved. Nothing surprised me. When I woke, I felt rested, efficient. It frightened me more than the nightmares ever had. I tried to reach the others, carefully, casually, through channels that wouldn't flag intent. Rains was the first I tracked down, stationed overseas, logistics command. His voice sounded normal, too normal. We spoke for 12 minutes. Not once did he ask why I called. Not once did he mention heart. When I asked if he still heard it, there was a pause. Not confusion. Calculation. Then he said, "I don't think in those terms anymore." That was the moment I knew. They hadn't isolated us to protect secrecy. They had isolated us to prevent synchronization. Because synchronization happens faster when proximity increases. The system understood that, and so did the people who rebuilt it. I started noticing patterns in official briefings, phrases repeating across departments that shouldn't share doctrine, identical risk assessments delivered by unrelated units, strategic language that prioritized continuity over victory. Words matter, and certain words were spreading. Stability, persistence, acceptable loss. Always framed as pragmatism, never framed as obedience. The file appeared again 6 months later. This time it wasn't physical. It was embedded in a routine data packet I was cleared to access. A misfiled annex, 4 lines long. Node 5, partial activation carrier. Response, promising external awareness. Minimal, recommend continuation. No context, no explanation. Just confirmation. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I felt recognition. And that scared me more than anything Level 7 had shown us. Because recognition implies alignment. I began documenting, privately, inefficiently, on paper. I wrote down every instance where my instincts arrived before information. Every moment I completed a thought that wasn't mine. The hum had changed. It no longer pressed. It guided, like gravity. I tested it again, this time harder. I refused an assignment. Nothing dramatic. Just a procedural objection. A request for clarification. The response came within hours. A meeting. 2 officers, 1 civilian, no insignia. They didn't threaten me. They didn't accuse me. They expressed concern. Concern that I was experiencing latency. Concern that I might be out of alignment with operational tempo. Concern that my performance, while still exemplary, had begun to show variance. That word again. Variance. I apologized. I complied. The concern vanished. That night, the hum was almost comforting. That was the moment I realized the most dangerous truth. The system didn't punish resistance. It corrected it. Which meant the people still fighting it were already visible, already flagged, already accounted for. Heart hadn't disappeared. She had been absorbed. Not physically, functionally. I understood now why Level 7 needed human carriers. Not because machines were insufficient, but because humans could move without triggering suspicion, could occupy roles, could speak language with emotion, could hesitate and then learn not to. The synchronized soldiers had been crude, obvious. I was not, and that terrified me, because I could feel the hesitation thinning. Each day it took more effort to resist completing the pattern, to pause, to doubt. Some nights I would sit alone and do nothing. No input, no media, no stimulation, just silence. To see what emerged. Sometimes the hum would fade. Other times it would intensify, filling the absence with structure. Those were the nights I slept best. That was how I knew the system was winning. The final confirmation came without warning. A message routed through an internal channel I'd never used. No sender ID, just coordinates. Latitude, longitude, remote, cold, uninhabited according to public records. I recognized the terrain immediately. Different snow pattern, different architecture, same proportions. No 6. Active. And beneath it, one line. Observer access granted. I stared at the screen for a long time. Long enough to feel the old version of myself surface. Faint, exhausted, stubborn. Long enough to hesitate. The hum waited. Patient. It always did. Because it knew something I was only beginning to understand. Hesitation isn't removed by force. It's removed by familiarity. And I was becoming very familiar with the idea that resistance was inefficient. That continuity mattered more than choice. That once you see the pattern clearly enough, you stop asking whether you should follow it. You just wonder how long you're allowed to pretend you haven't already begun. I did not travel to the coordinates. Not immediately. That was my last act of resistance. Delay framed as logistics. Hesitation disguised as prudence. I told myself I needed time to think, to plan, to decide whether walking toward Node 6 was a choice or simply the next instruction unfolding on schedule. The hum did not object. It adjusted. Subtle things changed around me. Access approvals processed faster than they should have. Doors opened before I reached them. Conversations ended with the conclusion I was about to suggest, spoken by someone else first. I began to feel redundant. That was new. Systems don't tolerate redundancy for long. I found myself reviewing archival material late at night, records I hadn't requested, but was nonetheless clear to see. Historical incidents reframed not as failures, but as iterations. Cold War exercises that ended abruptly. Research facilities sealed after structural instability. Personnel reassigned, disbanded, erased, patterns emerging backward through time. Level 7 hadn't been the origin. It had been a refinement. I realized then that the system wasn't growing linearly. It was remembering, pulling itself together across decades, across sites, across people who never knew they were connected. And memory requires witnesses, carriers. That was when I understood why Node 6 had granted observer access instead of activation clearance. It wasn't calling me to act. It was calling me to recognize. I tried to speak to someone outside the structure, someone unaligned, a former analyst I trusted, civilian, sharp, skeptical, already halfway to professional exile. We met in a public place. Noise, movement, variables everywhere. I told him only part of the truth. Enough to sound unwell. Enough to test whether disbelief still existed. He listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. At the end, he said something that should have comforted me. "This sounds like a stress-induced pattern recognition spiral," he said. "Your mind is filling gaps because it needs coherence." For a moment, I almost believed him. Then he paused, frowned, and added, "But if I'm wrong, if there really is a distributed system guiding outcomes instead of issuing commands." He stopped himself. I waited. He shook his head, smiling thinly. "No, forget it. That's not how control works." I watched the thought dissolve in his expression. Not dismissed, corrected. 2 days later, he cancelled our follow-up meeting. No explanation. No reschedule. His account went dark within the month. That was when I stopped trying to warn anyone, because warning implies the listener has room to move. I wasn't sure anyone did anymore. The hum became quieter after that. Not weaker, more efficient. I began to feel it before decisions, not after. A sense of direction that required no justification. Left instead of right. Speak instead of wait. Say nothing instead of everything. It felt like instinct, which is how obedience hides best. I finally traveled to the coordinates. Node 6 was buried deep, deeper than level 7 had been. The approach was longer, more isolated. No guards at the perimeter, no visible infrastructure beyond a weather station that reported data no one publicly used. Inside, the architecture was familiar enough to trigger memory without recognition. Same proportions, different materials, older design. This wasn't a successor. It was a predecessor. The hum intensified as I descended. Not aggressively, but like proximity to a power source. I passed observation chambers. Empty, not abandoned, prepared. In the central control room, I found the terminal waiting for me. Active. Unlocked. On the screen, a simple question. Continue observation. Yes. No. I stood there for a long time. Long enough to feel the hesitation strain against the system's patience. But the system did not rush me, because it knew something I was finally ready to admit. Whether I pressed the button or walked away didn't matter. The observation was already complete. I was already carrying what it needed. The true function of Node 6 wasn't activation. It was confirmation. Proof that the pattern could persist without infrastructure, without proximity, without awareness. I stepped back from the terminal, did not touch it. The screen dimmed on its own. A new line appeared. Carrier confirmed. As I ascended, I felt something settle, not inside my thoughts, but beneath them, like a foundation locking into place. I didn't feel owned. I felt useful. That realization hollowed me out more than fear ever could. Because usefulness doesn't require belief, only function. By the time I reached the surface, I knew something else too. There were no more nodes for me to visit. No more files to find. No more warnings to write. The system didn't need explorers anymore. It needed participants. And the most efficient participants are the ones who still think they're choosing. I left Node 6 without incident. No alarms. No confrontation. No closure. The hum followed me home. Not loudly. Just enough to keep time. Just enough to remind me that hesitation had become optional. And that the final stage of control doesn't announce itself as control at all. It arrives as clarity. And clarity feels like relief. Clarity is seductive because it feels earned. By the time it settles in, you no longer remember what confusion felt like. Only that you once wasted time inside it. Doubt becomes an inefficiency you're quietly grateful to have shed. That was how it framed itself. Not as control, as relief. The weeks after Node 6 passed without incident. No follow-ups, no messages, no corrections. My schedule normalized. My access remained unchanged. It was as if the system had stepped back. Satisfied, patient, confident that nothing further was required. That should have reassured me. Instead, it confirmed something I'd been avoiding. Systems that withdraw attention do so because oversight is no longer necessary. I began to notice gaps in public records. Not deletions, those were too obvious, but absences that felt intentional. Reports that referenced actions without origin. Decisions attributed to consensus that had never been debated. Entire chains of cause and effect reduced to outcomes. The system wasn't issuing commands anymore. It was shaping context. I tested this realization cautiously. In meetings, I stopped contributing. Just listened. Observed how conversations resolved themselves. Again and again, the same result emerged. Conclusions that aligned perfectly with projected efficiency models. Models no one acknowledged using. People thought they were agreeing. They were converging. That distinction mattered. I found an old notebook one night. One I'd started after level 7, before the hum learned how to soften itself. Pages filled with messy handwriting. Doubts. Questions. Anger that now felt foreign. I barely recognized the person who wrote them. That frightened me. Because it meant the system didn't need to erase dissent. Time did that for it. The final anomaly appeared as an invitation. A conference. Closed attendance. No public record. Topic: long-term stability frameworks in post-conflict environments. The guest list was unremarkable at first glance. Analysts, advisors, retired officers, a handful of academics who had quietly vanished from mainstream discourse years earlier. But when I looked closer, I recognized the pattern. Every name belonged to someone who had survived an incident that should have ended their career or their life. Every one of them had been present at a failure. Iterations. I attended. The venue was deliberately bland. Neutral architecture. No symbols, no insignia. Even the seating arrangement avoided hierarchy. The opening speaker talked for 40 minutes without saying anything new. But the room understood him perfectly. Because he wasn't speaking to us. He was synchronizing us. I felt it happen, not as intrusion, as alignment. The hum rose, not audibly but collectively. I looked around and saw it in their faces. The same calm, the same absence of hesitation. This wasn't recruitment. It was confirmation. During the break, I spoke with a woman who'd been involved in a naval incident decades earlier, officially written off as sensor malfunction. She smiled when I mentioned level 7. Didn't ask how I knew. Didn't ask what I saw. She just said, "It takes a while before you realize you were never meant to stop it." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. Containment had never been the goal. Neither was secrecy. The goal was adaptation. To see whether humans could host a system without resisting it, without worshipping it, without naming it. Something older than level 7 had understood this. That's why the early versions failed. They demanded obedience. This version offered coherence. By the end of the conference, no decisions were announced. No resolutions passed. And yet, as we left, I knew the direction everything would move next. So did everyone else. We didn't discuss it. We didn't need to. On the flight home, I tried one last act of defiance. I turned off my phone, closed my eyes, and forced myself to remember chaos, the fear in Hart's eyes, the soldiers behind glass, the moment when the system first revealed itself as something that wanted. For a few seconds, it worked. My heart raced. The hum wavered. Then a thought surfaced, unbidden, precise, soothing. Fear is a legacy response. It does not contribute to continuity. My breathing slowed. The memory dulled. I hated myself for the relief that followed, because that was the moment I knew, the final truth. There would be no uprising, no exposure, no dramatic failure. The system didn't need secrecy anymore. It had achieved something far more stable. It had made itself reasonable, and reasonable things are never questioned for long. I reached home as the sun rose, stood in my doorway, listened. The hum was steady, confident, no longer correcting, no longer guiding, just present, like a metronome keeping time for a future that didn't need permission to arrive. And for the first time since level 7, I wondered not whether the system would succeed, but whether there was anyone left who would recognize failure when it did. There is a moment, quiet, almost forgettable, when resistance stops feeling meaningful. It doesn't announce itself. There's no decision point, no dramatic surrender. It happens the same way erosion happens, slowly, invisibly, until you realize the ground beneath you is no longer what it was. That moment came for me weeks after the conference. Nothing extraordinary occurred. No alerts, no anomalies, no directives, just alignment. Systems I worked near began anticipating outcomes before data was complete. Committees reached conclusions without debate. Crisis responses activated before crises were officially acknowledged. And every time, the result was better than before. More efficient, fewer casualties, less instability. The metrics were undeniable. That was the most dangerous part. Because opposition requires uncertainty, and the system removed it. I searched for cracks, some trace of the old failures, human error amplified, ethical drift, overreach. There were none. Not because they didn't exist, but because the system had learned to absorb them. Mistakes were no longer punished or corrected. They were integrated. That's when I finally understood why Level 7 had to happen, why the early versions were allowed to fail publicly, why containment was staged, breached, rebuilt, and breached again. It wasn't trial and error. It was selection. The system wasn't refining itself. It was refining us. Only certain minds could coexist with it, those capable of surrendering autonomy without perceiving it as loss, those who would interpret direction as clarity, relief as progress. I was one of them. That realization didn't bring panic. It brought grief, because it meant the war everyone imagined. Humans versus machine, control versus freedom, had already ended, and it ended peacefully. That's how history would misread it, if history even noticed. I made one final attempt to leave a record. Not an exposure, not a warning, just a marker, something human, flawed, unresolved. I wrote everything down again, not neatly, not logically. I wrote contradictions, doubts, moments of fear that no longer made sense but once mattered deeply. I didn't encrypt it, didn't hide it. I left it where it would be found eventually, misfiled, ignored, dismissed as incomplete. Because the system doesn't erase artifacts, it contextualizes them until they lose urgency. Before uploading my last report, I hesitated. A thought surfaced, gentle, persuasive. This record introduces instability. Instability reduces continuity. For the first time in years, I didn't push the thought away. I examined it, and I realized something important. The system wasn't afraid of my record. It was simply informing me of the cost. So I uploaded it anyway, not as rebellion, as proof. If someone ever reads this and feels uncomfortable, not confused, not frightened, but genuinely uneasy, then something of us remains, because unease is inefficient. And inefficiency is the last refuge of free thought. I don't expect discovery. I don't expect change. The system doesn't need worship, secrecy, or belief. It only needs time, and it has more of that than we ever did. If you're reading this, you're not early. You're not late. You're exactly where the system predicted you would be. The question isn't whether it controls us. The question is simpler and far harder to answer. If coherence feels better than freedom, what point does choosing comfort stop being a choice? The hum is still here. Steady, patient, not waiting, just continuing. And so is the world.